Hey there, wake up, it's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., I'm the newsman, Sam Sachs. Good morning to everyone. It's the Friday show. You know, some said it couldn't be done, that we'd never make it. Well, look at us now, on the verge of another weekend. I'm so damn proud of you all. And we begin with the ongoing Hollywood writers' strike, which has now lasted nearly 3 weeks. With more than 11,000 members participating in the work stoppage, Writers Guild of America pickets have shut down productions across the country, late night TV is off the air, and yet the studio ownership class still refuses to budge on giving their writers a fair compensation deal. The issues of residual payments, staffing requirements, and work schedules remain sticking points in the negotiations, and the fact that the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers won't concede to the union on the issue of artificial intelligence suggests that studio owners really do see a future in which they can cut labor costs by asking machines to generate scripts. They figure, how hard is it to write the 47th Marvel movie anyway? You are seeing now cross-union solidarity in this labor struggle. Jacobin reported on the writers picketing outside a Broadway theater in New York City to halt shooting on a TV series. And there, members of the International Alliance of Theatrical and Stage Employees refused to cross the picket line. Also, members of the Screen Actors Guild, the union that represents movie, TV, and radio actors, have been fixtures on the pickets, though they themselves might soon be on strike as well, hitting the studios with a swift 1-2 punch. On Thursday, SAG-AFTRA announced that its 160,000 members will take a strike authorization vote over the next few weeks. The union's contract with the AMPTP expires at the end of June. Negotiations are slated to begin on June 7th, but the union wants to authorize a strike before those talks in order to have maximum leverage. SAG-AFTRA President Fran Drescher, who has shown up to several writers' pickets, but previously made comments suggesting that the writers and actors are in two different struggles, urged members of her union to support the strike authorization. Quote, "The prospect of a strike is not a first option but a last resort. As my dad always says, better to have and not need than to need and not have. Therefore, I implore eligible members to follow the leads of both the negotiating committee and the national board with an unprecedented show of solidarity and make 3 a charm with an emphatic yes for a strike authorization vote." In a press release, the union pointed to some of the issues affecting actors, which are similar to the issues affecting writers. Quote, "Earning a living as a professional performer has become increasingly difficult, with both inflation and the streaming ecosystem undercutting compensation. All the while, corporate profits and executive pay at studios continues to rise. Add to this the unregulated use of artificial intelligence and the burdens of the industry-wide shift to self-tape, the outlook for working actors becomes unsustainable without transformative change." The Directors Guild of America is also involved in negotiations over a new contract with the studios. Theirs expires at the end of June as well, though no strike authorization vote has been taken. Anyway, if you're mad that the new season of Severance is likely delayed because of all this, be sure to direct your anger at those who are responsible. Talentless studio ownership. Even the U.S. State Department was appalled by scenes out of Jerusalem on Thursday, where far-right Israeli nationalists, with the full approval of their government and security forces, hurled slurs and physically attacked Palestinian residents of the Old City. Tens of thousands of people participated in what's known as the Jerusalem Day Flag March, where Israelis celebrate the land seizures following the Six-Day War in 1967. According to Haaretz, Jewish participants in the rally could be heard shouting things like "death to Arabs" and, quote, "A Jew is a soul, an Arab is a son of a whore." Others chanted, "May your village burn." Some of the marchers beat Palestinians within the Muslim quarter. And the entire time, the Israeli fascists had the protection of security forces who made sure to detain and assault Palestinians who responded to the instigations. The march was approved by the Netanyahu government, and members of the ruling coalition, including far-right nationalist Itamar Ben-Gvir, attended it. So too did Energy Minister Yisrael Katz, who gave a speech in which he threatened to assassinate Palestinian leaders. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller posted on Twitter, quote, "The United States unequivocally opposes racist language of any form. We condemn the hateful chants such as 'death to Arabs' during today's marches in Jerusalem." A rare rebuke from Washington. Just don't ask the follow-up question, what consequences will there be? Because there won't be any. As fascists marched in Jerusalem, Palestinians convened their own march in Gaza. MMN correspondent Mohammed El-Safi was there to capture these images. Hundreds participated in the protest to condemn the Israeli flag march. and to call for an end to the ongoing violence against the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. And unlike the Zionists, who had the protection of security forces for their march, the Palestinians were attacked by Israeli forces during their rally. A number of people were injured by tear gas canisters, including children. You can see in this video the Israeli drones dropping chemical agents on Palestinians, who responded by burning rubber tires near the separation fence east of Gaza. Al Jazeera reported that at one point, Israeli forces used live fire on the protesters in Gaza, injuring several people. The dueling flag marches occurred amid a fragile ceasefire between the occupiers and the occupied. Last week, Israeli Defense Forces carried out a sustained bombing campaign in Gaza that killed at least 33 Palestinians. The laboratories of democracy are producing some extremely toxic compounds this week. Republicans in the state of North Carolina overrode a veto by the governor and enacted a 12-week abortion ban. It's the 19th state to either outright ban the medical procedure or significantly restrict it since the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision last year. And in South Carolina, the state house passed an even more restrictive 6-week abortion ban. The measure will now be taken up by the state Senate. A prior prohibition on abortion after 6 weeks was struck down by the South Carolina Supreme Court, but the justice who wrote the opinion, the lone female on the court, has since retired and been replaced by a man who is a reactionary doofus. So Republicans think they can get the job finished this time. Meanwhile, up in Montana, Republican Governor Greg Gianforte signed a bill into law that blocks residents of the state from accessing TikTok. Mobile app stores will be prohibited from offering TikTok, which is owned by a Chinese parent company, to people in Montana beginning next year. The right's obsession with banning TikTok is one of the more absurd storylines coming out of this burgeoning Cold War with China. But when it comes to states doing the most harm to their residents, I have to give the dishonors to my home state, Florida. Governor Meatball Ron DeSantis signed a slew of anti-trans bills into law this week, adding to the scores of other anti-LGBTQ plus laws that have been passed at the state level across the U.S. One of them, SB 254 in Florida, prohibits young trans people from seeking gender-affirming health care. It also punishes doctors and nurses who provide such care with a felony and possible jail time. The law also gives emergency powers to courts to block young people from fleeing the state to seek treatment elsewhere, and it gives the state the power to remove kids from their parents if they're found to be receiving health care to treat gender dysmorphia. Adults are affected by the new law too, since it prohibits state and local government funding from going toward gender-affirming care, not just for young people, but also adults. So anyone on a public health care plan or who works for the government could be forced to detransition if they can't cover costs out of pocket. Another bill signed by DeSantis, HB 1521, blocks trans people from using the bathroom associated with their gender identity in all government buildings, such as schools, airports, and prisons. A person can be charged with a misdemeanor for not leaving a bathroom if asked to do so by a government employee. Other provisions signed into law by DeSantis would prohibit school employees from mentioning their preferred pronouns or inquiring about a student's pronouns. And businesses can now be stripped of their licenses if they host drag shows in which children are present. Ron DeSantis will likely never be president. He just doesn't have the juice. But his audition for the job is wreaking havoc on Floridians.
If you log on to a long-dead online game, what will you see? Who will you meet? When the profits have long dried up and the novelty is left, what keeps a virtual world going? What sorts of people are still hanging around? What kind of culture have they created? What traditions? What relationships? In 100 years, will anyone remember any of it? Virtual worlds are delicate things and they can vanish with hardly a trace. You can archive the offline software, but a dead world can only tell you so much. It's just as important to document how people spent their time within it. Welcome to Preserving Worlds, a travelogue that takes us through some of the most interesting and impactful online games and communities of the past 40 years. Along the way, we'll meet people who are working against obsolescence to keep the communities they care about alive and accessible.
Well, we can't start the weekend without naming a rich dick, so let's get to it. Thanks for the nominations on social media. Rona putting up all the goddamn landlords as usual. Thank you, Rona. Got a couple nominations for Elon Musk this week for his usual rich dickery, but also for all of his anti-Semitic tweets that he decided to fire off. Beginning to think this guy is a scumbag. I don't know. Got a nomination here for Jimmy Fallon, who is posting about playing the new Zelda game, while his workers on The Tonight Show are not getting paid due to the ongoing writer's strike. Fallon is paying his writers' salaries, which is probably what's saving him from being the rich dick of the week. But the rest of his staff is not getting paid, so maybe don't boast about how much fun you're having playing video games, Jimmy. Here's a nomination for Dave Chappelle, who is transforming into a comedian who tells rich and powerful people what they want to hear. His latest bit is mocking homeless people in San Francisco. Someone nominated Steph Curry, who won a citizenship award from the NBA, despite being a NIMBY when it comes to affordable housing developments in his neighborhood. Not great, Steph. Very strong nominations, thank you everyone, but in the end, this week's rich dick is Nancy Pelosi. So we did have a nomination for Dianne Feinstein, but there's been a new development in that saga that requires us to note the role of the former Speaker of the House in what can perhaps be described now as elder abuse. Politico has the scoop this week on the force behind the scenes that is keeping the 89-year-old Senator Dianne Feinstein in office despite being in dire poor health and unable to do her job. In fact, it was reported that Feinstein suffered from shingles complications that weren't previously disclosed, including encephalitis, or swelling of the brain. And in an interview with reporters, Feinstein genuinely did not seem to know that she's been away from Washington for months. Hard to blame Feinstein for remaining in office when she doesn't seem to know where she is. And that's where Pelosi comes in. According to Politico, Pelosi's daughter has been by Feinstein's side, tending to her, serving essentially as her primary caregiver, and also helping to keep up the appearance that she can do her job. To what end, you might ask? Well, to prevent a black woman from being seated as a United States Senator from California. Yeah, it really is that depraved. Feinstein has announced she won't seek re-election, thank God, and there are already a number of candidates who've entered the race to replace her. Nancy Pelosi has endorsed Adam Schiff, who is currently a U.S. rep from California, and she's already helped him raise an impressive campaign war chest of $15 million. The problem for Schiff and Pelosi is, if Feinstein were to resign early, it would go to California Governor Gavin Newsom to appoint a replacement to serve the rest of Feinstein's term through 2024. And Newsom has already pledged to pick a black woman for the position, which would likely be progressive Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who has also announced her candidacy for Feinstein's Senate seat. Allowing Lee to serve as a senator for a year and a half would boost her candidacy in 2024 and erase the advantages Schiff already has. And Pelosi knows this. So the plan is to keep Feinstein in office until her term is over. A Pelosi family confidant told Politico this explicitly. Quote, "If Di-Fi resigns right now, there is an enormous probability that Barbara Lee gets appointed, thus it makes it harder for Schiff." The source added that the relationship between Pelosi, her daughter, and the senator is, quote, "being kept under wraps and very, very closely held." They further said, quote, "It's very tricky and political because they want her to stay. The political thinking is that if Di-Fi stays as long as possible, it helps Schiff as well." Wow. So we've got Nancy Pelosi trying to manipulate a Senate race so that her friend wins it by forcing her other friend whose brain is swollen and is in failing health to continue to work, all the while depriving the nearly 40 million people in her home state of California effective representation in the Senate. Not to mention impeding work in the Judiciary Committee that could go into investigating a corrupt Supreme Court justice. Honestly, this might be worse than all the insider trading allegations. But it's the sort of entitlement you'd expect from someone who spent decades in the halls of power and is worth north of $100 million. Of course, Pelosi thinks she can be able to single-handedly control who sits in a U.S. Senate seat. Nancy Pelosi, this week's Rich Dick. All right, friends, the show ends this morning with a sunrise from Mexico. It was sent in by Ray and Jova in Mérida, Yucatan. Enjoy. Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Jova. Show's over. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up for Means TV if you haven't yet. There's a 7-day free trial going on right now. Also, subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels. One day, capitalism's going to fall. I promise. It will. But until then, we're going to be right here. See you next week.